You don't stumble into transmissions like this. You phase into them. Something in your field has already moved. You're only just catching up. Right now, as these words pass through your awareness, a silent calibration is happening in the background of your life, not in your schedule, not in your plans. In the quantum architecture underneath everything you think is solid about you, the part of you that thinks you clicked on a video is late to the event. Your deeper system already accepted the invitation. You are entangled, not in a romantic sense, in a physics sense. Your consciousness has become correlated with a higher timeline state, a version of you that already remembers what your nervous system is still afraid to admit. You aren't here to learn a new idea. You're here because the entangled counterpart of you has already crossed a threshold, and the echo of that crossing is arriving as this moment. Look at your life for a second. The glitches, the repeated numbers, the strange alignments that feel too precise to be coincidence but too fragile to explain to anyone else. The conversations that arrive at the exact sentence your inner monologue just whispered. The way certain people suddenly fall away, as if a hidden hand is silently editing your cast. You call it weird. The quantum field calls it measurement. Every time you observe those anomalies and feel that electric chill that something is watching me from inside my own life, the sensation you're brushing against the seam where timelines intersect. You think you're noticing patterns. In reality, the pattern is noticing you. Higher order coherence is testing whether you'll keep pretending this is random or finally admit that your reality has started responding to something beyond your conscious choices. Chosen isn't a compliment here. It's a technical condition. Your attention has reached a density where it can no longer play small without fracturing you. The coping strategies that kept you safe in older timelines, denial, self-shrinking, apologizing for your own intuition, are starting to feel like physical pain. Your body is rejecting outdated scripts like an immune system rejecting foreign tissue. That pressure you feel, the low-grade existential anxiety, the sense that time is speeding up and closing in all at once, it isn't a personal failure. It's a phase transition. A higher timeline is in constructive interference with your current one, beating against it like two overlapping frequencies, and you're standing in the interference pattern. Part of you wants to run. Part of you can't look away. Because something in you recognizes this as the moment you quietly contracted for before you arrived here. The moment where spiritual ideas stop being aesthetic and start being operational. Where words like quantum, entanglement, timeline, observer effect stop living in books and begin recalibrating your relationships, your choices, your identity. You're not early. You're not late. You're right on the edge. And now the question isn't whether your entanglement with that higher timeline is real. It is. The real question is what happens to a life like yours when you stop resisting the pull and allow that entangled version of you to begin dictating the terms of your reality. Here's what happens first. The sabotage intensifies. When a higher timeline locks onto you, it doesn't arrive as instant bliss. It arrives as a ruthless audit. Everything in your current life that cannot travel with you begins to misfire, malfunction, or mysteriously dissolve. The friendships built on your self-denial, the work built on your fear, the habits built on numbing instead of knowing. They start to feel sour in your mouth, like food your body can't digest anymore. You call it burnout. Your field calls it incompatibility. You've normalized a level of inner noise that a higher timeline simply will not host. The entangled version of you doesn't carry the same self-betrayal, the same rehearsed smallness, the same constant performance, just to be allowed to exist. So, as your consciousness becomes correlated with that version, anything in your present reality that depends on your old distortions starts losing its charge. People suddenly don't text back. Opportunities evaporate for no logical reason. The old fantasy of, if I just try harder, it will work, stops working. This is not punishment. This is decoherence. In quantum physics, decoherence is what happens when a delicate, non-local state collides with an environment that can't sustain it. The entangled, possibility-rich state collapses into something ordinary. In your life, you've been decohering your own higher potentials for years, collapsing into the safest, most acceptable version of yourself the environment would tolerate. Smile here, stay quiet there. Don't mention the visions, the strange dreams, the way your chest hums before something big happens. Don't talk about how you can feel other people's thoughts as pressure in your body. Don't mention that time bent around you when you needed help and reality answered precisely like it heard you. You've been editing your own physics to stay relatable. So the higher timeline does something merciful and brutal at the same time. It begins to remove, one by one, the environments in which you can only exist by fragmenting yourself. The job where your soul has to go offline to earn money. The relationship that requires you to betray your intuition to keep the peace. The identity you built to be loved by people who never intended to meet the real you. It feels like loss. It's actually measurement. Each collapse is the field asking you, do you want coherence or comfort? Do you want truth or approval? Do you want your higher timeline or your old story? The higher version of you, the one you're entangled with, does not negotiate on these questions. That version is already living in a reality where your sensitivity is an interface, not a flaw. Where your anxiety is understood as unused awareness, not a disorder. Where your too much is recognized as accurate bandwidth for reading a complex, shifting world. So, when you cling to what's leaving, the pain amplifies, not because you're weak, but because you're holding two incompatible states at once. One hand gripped around an identity you've outgrown, the other hand already reaching into the field for something that matches who you actually are. That tension is what you call being stuck. You're not stuck, you're double-booked. Two timelines are trying to run on the same screen, the one where you keep pretending and the one where you stop. The one where you live inside inherited scripts, and the one where you begin writing from the inside out. The one where your past defines your coordinates, and the one where your future self starts sending back instructions through synchronicities, dreams, sudden pulls you can't logically justify. That pull you feel towards certain places, certain studies, certain people who feel like home, even though you've just met. That isn't random. That's entanglement routing you through probability space, nudging you toward environments with enough coherence to host your next version. You sense it most clearly in the quiet moments, when the noise drops and a single, clean sentence rises up from somewhere deeper than thought. You can't keep living like this. That sentence isn't a criticism. It's a quantum boundary. It's the higher timeline informing you, gently but firmly, that your old strategies have expired, that the cost of staying the same has overtaken the perceived safety of not changing, that there is now more danger in clinging to what's familiar than in stepping into what's unknown. And somewhere inside you, the part that's already crossed over nods patiently, because it knows what happens when you finally stop arguing with your own becoming. So here's what it looks like when you stop arguing. At first, nothing on the surface changes. You still wake up in the same room, you still see the same messages on your phone, you still walk through the same spaces that once felt like cages. But there is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in how you are looking. Your gaze stops begging reality for permission and starts auditing it for truth. You're not asking, do they like me? You're asking, does this match me? That distinction is the beginning of timeline selection. In quantum terms, every observation is a measurement, and every measurement is a choice about which version of reality gets to stabilize around you. Most people measure their world with one question: is this safe enough to keep me from feeling my old pain? You begin to measure with a different question: is this aligned enough to carry my future self? The moment you do that, you change which branch of the probability tree your life starts walking down. You notice it in your conversations, where you used to nod along, laughing at jokes that cut against your own sensitivity. You feel your throat tighten when you try to play along. The words won't exit as easily. You hear yourself go silent instead of betraying what you actually feel. Silence used to be collapse. Now it becomes data. You are watching who notices your withdrawal, who senses that something in you has gone offline from the old script. This is not you becoming distant. This is you exiting a false agreement. You begin to realize how many contracts you signed without ever using a pen. Agreements like, I'll dim so you don't feel threatened. I'll explain myself so you don't feel abandoned. I'll stay small so you don't call me arrogant. These were your survival algorithms. They kept you accepted in timelines that would have rejected your fuller expression. But your entangled timeline has different contracts. They sound more like, I will not betray my own knowing to maintain access to chaos. So you start experimenting. Not a grand reinvention, micro-experiments, quantum tests. You say no once where you always said yes. You tell one small, inconvenient truth where you used to smooth everything over. You give yourself 10 seconds, just 10, to let your body feel what it actually feels before you overlay the acceptable emotion on top. Those 10 seconds are a portal. Most people never walk through it, because the moment you stop overriding your inner signal, you meet the backlog. All the quiet alarms you've been snoozing for years start going off at once. Your system floods with the grief of who you had to be in order to be allowed to exist. The anger at the ways you were trained to mistrust your own perception. The sorrow of all the times you knew something was wrong and swallowed it anyway. You think you're breaking down. You're not. You're defragmenting. A higher timeline cannot integrate with you if you're scattered into roles you no longer believe in. So the field invites you into an uncomfortable precision. Feel what you actually feel. Want what you actually want. Name what you actually see. Not to broadcast it. Not to perform awakening as a brand, but to restore coherence inside your own consciousness. Coherence is what happens when your thoughts, emotions, and actions stop canceling each other out. You think of leaving. You feel the pull to leave. And instead of talking yourself out of it, you take one small action that acknowledges the truth. You research options. You clear a drawer. You send the email. You write the first line of the message you're afraid to send. It doesn't matter how small it is. What matters is that your inner state and your outer behavior line up for once. That alignment is a broadcast. In the quantum field, you stop signaling, I'll tolerate anything as long as I don't have to lose this attachment, and begin signaling, I will no longer host realities that require my self-erasure. The field doesn't respond to your language. It responds to your configuration, and your configuration is changing. You may notice strange synchronicities intensify as you do this. Sentences in books that mirror your private thoughts. Random videos recommending the exact concept you were just wrestling with. People reaching out who speak the language you thought you had to keep hidden. This is not the algorithm. This is entanglement. Your higher timeline is not a place. It's a pattern of choices. And as you begin to make those choices in tiny, almost invisible ways, a quiet realization slides in. You are not waiting for the shift. You are performing it. There comes a moment where the performance drops so sharply that even you can't pretend not to notice it. You're mid-conversation, mid-task, mid-scroll, and suddenly it feels like you've stepped outside your own body and you're watching yourself from a few inches behind your skull. You hear the words leaving your mouth, and they sound like an old recording. Familiar lines, familiar laugh, familiar mask, but something in you is no longer participating. That something is the entangled witness. It's the part of you already seated in the higher timeline, watching your current behaviors the way a scientist watches an experiment that's already yielded its data. Not with judgment, with clarity. You're the one who feels judged, because you can sense the distance between what you're doing and who you actually are. This is where the deeper physics begins. In quantum mechanics, entangled particles share a state. Change one, and the other changes instantly, regardless of distance. In your life, you are the particle stretched between two configurations, past self-identity and future self-coherence. When your future configuration stabilizes enough, it begins to retroactively reformat your present. That's why memories start resurfacing. Not the obvious ones, the subtle ones you buried because they didn't fit the story you were forced to live. The moment a teacher dismissed your question with ridicule, and something in you quietly decided not to show your intelligence too brightly ever again. The first time you felt the atmosphere in a room shift before anyone said a word, and you knew something was wrong, but the adults told you you were too sensitive. Each resurfacing memory is not random torment. It's a data correction. Your higher timeline is sending a signal back through your history, retagging key scenes. Not your fault, not your limitation, not proof that your perception is broken. It's like someone going through your internal archive, removing the old labels that said, "Evidence I'm wrong," and replacing them with, "Evidence the environment was incoherent." This hurts, because it means you weren't crazy. You were accurate in a place that needed you disoriented. When that realization lands, you experience a temporary disidentification. The roles you played to survive, the peacemaker, the overachiever, the fixer, the invisible one, flicker. You see them as configurations, not essence. Positions you took inside a chaotic field, not your core self. And here is the dangerous edge. Once you see a role as a role, you can't fully go back into it without splintering. Your nervous system feels this. That's why your body has been protesting so loudly. The headaches, the gut tension, the fatigue that no amount of sleep touches, the sudden jolts awake in the middle of the night with your heart racing as if you were being chased by something with no visible form. You aren't being chased by darkness. You're being chased by your own unslipped mask. The higher timeline is relentless, not because it hates you, but because it knows what you become when you stop confusing defense mechanisms for personality traits. It knows the clarity you carry when you aren't busy managing everyone else's emotional weather. It knows the power of a consciousness like yours when it is no longer running 1,000 subroutines of self-suppression in the background. So life starts applying pressure. The old coping behaviors stop providing relief. The distractions that once numbed you now leave you feeling hollow. The people whose chaos you used to stabilize now feel heavy in your field, as if every interaction drags your frequency down by a few notches. You can't unfeel this. You can only delay acting on it. Delay has a cost. In quantum terms, staying in a superposition trying to be both your old self and your emerging self burns energy. You feel it as overwhelm, as indecision, as mental fog. Your mind tries to think its way out of what is fundamentally a frequency problem. You loop through scenarios, rehearse conversations, seek reassurance, search for a version of the story where no one is upset, nothing is lost, and you still get to fully live. That version doesn't exist, not in the higher timeline, because the higher timeline isn't an upgraded comfort zone. It's a different operating system. It won't run on hardware built from self-abandonment. Something has to give. Either the old identity dies, or the new frequency dims. For most of your life, you've chosen to dim. That option is expiring, so the field begins presenting you with binary moments. Yes, no, stay, go, speak, stay silent. At first, they look small. Whether you answer a message immediately or give yourself space. Whether you override your exhaustion to keep being reliable, or you let someone else be disappointed. Whether you pretend not to notice the red flags, or you acknowledge them and act accordingly. Each micro-decision is a measurement. Each measurement strengthens one timeline and weakens the other. This is the training ground. Not the big cinematic turning points, but the ordinary, invisible choices where no one is clapping and no one is filming except your own consciousness. Entangled with the version of you who's already on the other side, watching closely to see which reality you are quietly voting for with your daily behavior. There is a moment when the votes stop being hypothetical and start becoming law. You don't get an announcement, no angelic trumpet, no cinematic soundtrack. You wake up one ordinary day and notice that your default response has shifted. Where you once reflexively abandoned yourself, you pause. Where you once sought external permission before moving, you feel a quiet, internal yes and follow it without drafting a speech. That's not personality growth. That's a phase shift. In physics, when a system crosses a critical threshold, it doesn't just improve, it reorganizes. Water doesn't gradually become ice. It holds liquid until it doesn't, then the molecules lock into a crystalline lattice. Your consciousness has a similar threshold. For a long time, your choices look like noise, a yes here, a no there, one moment of courage, followed by 3 days of regression. But beneath the noise, there is a trend, and the field is listening to the trend. The higher timeline stabilizes when your choices form a coherent pattern. Coherence does not mean perfection. It means direction. It means that when you mess up, when you override yourself, When you slip back into appeasing, when you ghost your own intuition, you don't turn that into proof that you're incapable. You treat it like data. You correct course. You choose again, sooner than you would have before. This is how you become unrecognizable to your past timeline, because your old reality was built on a specific probability distribution, the expectation that you would keep choosing yourself last. People, opportunities, dynamics arranged themselves around that assumption. They could depend on you to self-abandon on schedule. That's why you were exhausted. Your energy was used as structural support for environments that couldn't stand on their own. As you start withdrawing that support, structures wobble. Some collapse fast, an argument, a breakup, a sudden job shift. Others decay slowly, like buildings left without maintenance. Conversations become more superficial. Invitations arrive less often. You're tempted to interpret this as rejection. Look closer. The field is not punishing you. It is releasing you from realities calibrated to your old self-neglect. When you stop hosting them, they have nowhere to live. They drift out of your orbit, searching for someone whose frequency still matches their script. At the same time, something else begins to appear at the periphery. You notice new kinds of people, not necessarily with spiritual branding, but with spiritual infrastructure. Humans who take responsibility for their own emotional weather, who don't demand that you shrink for them to feel tall, who can sit in silence without trying to fix or deflect what you're feeling. They may not use your language, but their nervous systems recognize your new configuration. You aren't imagining the relief your body feels around them. That relief is a measurement. Your cells are reading the environment and reporting back. We can exist here without splitting. That is one of the clearest markers of entanglement with a higher timeline. Your metric for belonging shifts from, do they want me, to, can I be whole here? Whole doesn't mean polished, it means undivided. And this is where the training deepens, because once you start encountering more coherent environments, you will be tempted to import your old adaptations into them. You'll want to preempt rejection by shrinking, even when no one is asking you to. You'll want to apologize for your sensitivity, even when it's being welcomed as intelligence. You'll want to scan the room for danger, even when your system is reporting safety. This is residual code. Your higher timeline is not only about leaving misaligned spaces, it's about refusing to reenact misalignment in spaces that are actually safe. That takes practice. You learn to let your shoulders stay dropped when your instinct is to tighten. You learn to speak your actual opinion when your mouth wants to default to neutrality. You learn to let people see you when every survival reflex screams that visibility is fatal. It isn't fatal anymore. That warning was calibrated to another life. In quantum language, this is the quantum Zeno effect in reverse. When you keep looking at yourself through the old measurement, expecting rejection, danger, humiliation, you freeze yourself in that state. But when you begin observing yourself through a new metric, I am allowed to exist as I am here now, you freeze in a different configuration. Your attention is the measuring device. The question is, what state are you continually confirming? As you hold your awareness differently, you notice time behaving strangely. Some days stretch open, filled with unexpected clarity, as if hours have more room inside them. Other days compress. Weeks of old growth seem to happen in a single conversation, a single decision, a single night of honest tears on the floor of your room. This isn't just psychological, it's temporal dilation on the human scale. When you align with your higher timeline, you're no longer dragging the inertia of a life lived against your own grain. Each choice lines up with a vector that has been pulling you for years. The acceleration you feel is the removal of internal friction. External friction doesn't vanish, but now it has nowhere to stick inside you. You still meet resistance, confused friends, threatened dynamics, systems that benefit from your compliance. The difference is that you are no longer fighting yourself and them at the same time. You're standing on one side, yours. Your field is no longer divided, and that creates a kind of presence that even incoherent environments feel but can't quite define. Some will try to pull you back into the old play. Some will quietly step aside. A few will rise to meet you. All of them are responding to the same invisible shift. The moment your entanglement with the higher timeline stops being a possibility and becomes your baseline. At some point, The shift stops being about behavior and starts being about ontology, about what you actually believe you are. For most of your life, you've been trained to see yourself as a localized object, a body moving through a pre-existing world, reacting to events that arrive from out there. Even your spiritual language may have sat on top of that assumption. You manifest, you attract, you call in, all centered around a separate you trying to influence a resistant universe. Your higher timeline carries a different premise. You are not an object in a universe. You are a node in a field. The quantum loom doesn't sit outside you, weaving fate while you watch. Your awareness is one of the threads. When you start living from this, not as an idea but as a visceral fact, your relationship with everything changes. Your past, your pain, your future, your choices. You begin to notice how often your body reports the field before your mind has language for it. Walking into a room, you feel your chest tighten half a second before the conversation turns sharp. Thinking about a decision, your gut drops, even while your logic is busy crafting pros and cons. Meeting a new person, your system relaxes or bristles before you've exchanged 3 sentences. In older timelines, you overruled these micro-readings. You called them irrational, dramatic, unproven. You deferred to external authority, the expert, the group, the rulebook, the mask. You assumed the environment was stable, and you were faulty. Your entangled timeline flips that interpretation. You start treating your sensitivity as instrumentation. You don't worship it blindly, you calibrate it. You ask, what did my body register just now? Where have I felt this exact signal before? What did I ignore last time this showed up? Slowly, patterns emerge. Certain atmospheres that always drain you, certain communication styles that always leave you doubting yourself, certain subtleties that precede betrayal or breakthrough. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. The more you honor those readings, the clearer they become. Static drops, signal strengthens. You're no longer begging for neon signs. You're listening to the quiet, precise shifts that have been speaking to you since before you had words. Your nervous system stops screaming because it no longer has to compete with your denial to get your attention. And something else happens. Your relationship to your past selves begins to soften. Where you used to judge them, why did I stay so long? Why didn't I see it? How could I have tolerated that? You start to see the context. You see the field as it was. The pressures, the unspoken rules, the emotional blackmail, the lack of safe mirrors. You understand that earlier versions of you were not weak. They were under-resourced. Compassion isn't sentimental here. It's technical. Because every time you rewrite your interpretation of who you were, you change the boundary conditions of who you can be. If your past is defined as proof that I'm defective, then your future will be about compensating. If your past becomes evidence of how finely tuned my perception always was, even when unvalidated, your future becomes about expression. Expression instead of compensation. That's a different life. You notice this in how you speak to yourself after a trigger. Where you used to pile shame on top of pain, you now say things like, "Of course that hurt. That situation asked me to go against my own read again." Or, "Of course I'm tired. I've been holding an entire architecture of other people's comfort on my back." Each self-honest sentence is a tiny cut in the old contract. This honesty doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. Instead of vaguely wanting your life to get better, you can name exactly what doesn't fit. I cannot stay in dynamics where my intuition is pathologized. I cannot work in systems that reward dissociation over depth. I cannot date realities that require me to misrepresent my sensitivity as a flaw. These are not affirmations. These are parameters. In quantum terms, you're tightening the allowable states your consciousness will host. You're telling the field, with your actions and your refusals, these configurations are no longer viable. The field responds by withdrawing its energy from those patterns. They destabilize. You feel the wobble. It scares you and frees you at the same time. Then, quietly, another layer of realization lands. Your entanglement with the higher timeline is not about becoming special, it's about becoming accurate. Accurate to what your system has been registering for years. Accurate to the threads you've always felt under the surface of events. Accurate to the loom You've sensed the one that weaves connections, synchronicities, and impossible alignments when you follow the line of truth instead of the line of fear. You aren't being asked to become someone else. You're being asked to stop pretending you're not already who you are. As accuracy deepens, your reality starts answering back in a new dialect. You realize the universe has been talking to you in a language you were never taught to read, not just through big events, but through micro adjustments. The way a room brightens when you speak the truth, the way your body unclenches when you choose the option that scares your ego but calms your nervous system, the way time stretches when you're in the right place, with the right people. You used to call these coincidences. Now, you begin treating them as feedback. Think of it this way. The higher timeline is not a distant destination. It's a standing wave, a pattern already oscillating in the quantum loom. When you align your inner configuration with that pattern, you don't travel to it. You resonate with it. You phase lock. Your life becomes a series of fine-tuning movements, like twisting a dial until the static drops and the signal comes through clean. You start to live like a scientist of your own field. You test things. You notice what happens to your body when you say yes out of obligation versus alignment. One leaves a residue, a subtle heaviness, a delayed resentment, a sense of having gone slightly off course. The other leaves a strange calm, even if it leads you straight into discomfort. Calm doesn't mean ease. Calm means coherence. You begin keeping quiet score. Who leaves you scrambled afterward, no matter how charming they are? Who leaves you clearer, even if the conversation was intense? Which environments amplify your self-trust, and which ones corrode it? Which inputs, media, spaces, routines leave your field noisy, and which ones leave it spacious enough for new instructions to land? You don't need a spreadsheet. Your body is already keeping the data. The more you honor this, the more your daily life becomes a series of micro-initiations. You wake, and instead of grabbing for distraction, you sit for 3 breaths longer than your impatience wants. On those 3 breaths, you notice what your mind tries to outrun: the dread, the excitement, the unnamed pull towards something you haven't built language or logistics around yet. Those 3 breaths are not self-care, they're calibration. You're teaching your system that you can hold charge, emotional, energetic, existential, without instantly numbing it. Every time you do, you increase your capacity to host the higher timeline. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like making eye contact with your own life and not looking away. Then there's your speech. You become painfully aware of how many sentences exist purely to manage other people's perception of you. The nervous jokes, the disclaimers, the automatic "it's fine, don't worry about it," even when it isn't fine and you are worried. Each time you hear yourself doing it, there's a split second where you can choose: reinforce the old pattern or disrupt it. Disruption can be small. Instead of saying, "it's nothing," you say, "actually, that did affect me." Instead of pretending you're okay with a boundary being crossed, you say, "that doesn't work for me." Your voice may shake. Your words may be imperfect. That's irrelevant. The field is not grading your delivery. It's registering that you refuse to abandon yourself again. And underneath all of this, a new orientation forms. You stop asking, "How do I avoid consequences?" and start asking, "What reality does this choice reinforce?" Because every action has 2 levels of impact. On the surface, it affects circumstances: who stays, who leaves, what opportunity arrives, what door closes. But at the deeper level, it affects architecture, the kind of world you are helping stabilize in the quantum loom. The higher timeline is not just your best life. It is a configuration of reality in which beings like you are allowed to exist undivided. When you choose alignment over appeasement, you're not just changing your story. You're voting for that world to exist. This is why your entanglement matters more than your comfort. You are not just healing for yourself. You are altering the probability distribution of what becomes normal on this planet. Every time you refuse to participate in dynamics that require self-erasure, you slightly reduce their dominance in the collective field. Most of this will never be seen. No one will write headlines about your quiet revolutions, but the loom records them. It records the morning you told the truth instead of performing, the night you cried on the floor and chose to feel instead of dissociate, the conversation where you said, I can't do this version of myself anymore, even if the person in front of you didn't understand. The higher timeline is watching those moments, not your highlight reel. And as they accumulate, you begin to notice something strange. Reality starts prearranging itself around your integrity. Doors you thought you'd have to kick down open without drama. People who match your new frequency appear at angles you couldn't have strategized. Situations that would have trapped you before now dissolve as soon as you name them clearly. It looks like luck from the outside. From the inside, you know it's resonance. The loom isn't rewarding you for being good. It's simply less obstructed now that you've stopped working against your own design. As resonance stabilizes, something you never expected begins to happen. The world starts mirroring back a version of you you've never seen before. Not the curated persona, not the survival avatar. A quieter, stranger, more precise self that feels both ancient and newly born. People you barely know start saying things like, "You feel different," or "There's something about your presence now." They can't name it because the shift isn't in your costume, it's in your field. You notice it most when you say almost nothing. In situations that used to scramble you, you find yourself listening instead of defending. You track the energy in the room, the way a physicist tracks particles in a chamber. Who is leaking? Who is inflating? Who is actually grounded? Your old impulse to fix, to justify, to over-explain rises like a reflex, and you don't bite. You let silence do part of the work. Silence in a coherent field is not empty, it's structurally loaded. The absence of your old compliance forces the environment to reveal itself. Without your automatic smoothing, you see who takes responsibility when things get uncomfortable and who looks for someone to absorb the impact. This is uncomfortable data, but it's clean. You begin to understand that your energy used to subsidize other people's refusal to evolve. Not because you were foolish, but because you were entangled with an older pattern. If I just hold enough, they won't break. If I just absorb enough, they won't leave. If I just dim enough, they'll love me. That pattern was never personal. It was ancestral. It ran through your lineage, your culture, your early environments. Your higher timeline is where that pattern ends. You can feel the weight of that sometimes, the sense that you're carrying more than your own story when you say no to something that every generation before you said yes to. The first in your line to leave a type of relationship, the first to decline a certain kind of career cage, the first to treat your nervous system as sacred architecture instead of an obstacle to productivity. This is bigger than preference. It's a structural break in the fabric. In the quantum loom, patterns don't dissolve in abstraction. They dissolve when one node, one consciousness refuses to route energy through them anymore. When you stop powering an old timeline, you are not betraying your lineage. You are editing its trajectory. You are saying, this is where we stop calling self-erasure love. Of course, the resistance flares, not just from people, but from the pattern itself. It uses familiar scripts: guilt, obligation, fear of being alone. It whispers, who do you think you are to step out of this? What if you're wrong? What if you're the problem? These voices don't mean you're off track. Often, they mean you're at a critical threshold. Thresholds are rarely euphoric. They feel like standing in a doorway during a storm. Behind you, the house that's burning, but that you know how to navigate blindfolded. In front of you, air you've never breathed, landscapes you haven't mapped, a kind of loneliness that isn't about absence of people, but absence of old roles. Your system shakes because it knows once you cross, you can't unknow the view. In that doorway, entanglement shows its true nature. You feel two pulls at once, the gravity of the known and the vector of the higher timeline. One drags at your fear, the other speaks to your recognition. Fear says, you will lose everything. Recognition says, you will lose everything that requires you to stay unreal. You already know which one is telling the truth. So you start making decisions that look irrational to the old pattern and inevitable to the new one. You leave places where your soul has to wear armor just to enter the room. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You let some stories about you remain wrong in other people's mouths rather than wasting your life correcting their lens. Each surrender is terrifying. Each surrender is precise. Because you're not surrendering to chaos. You're surrendering to the architecture that's been quietly forming under all your years of dissonance. The architecture in which your sensitivity, your pattern recognition, your refusal to fully belong to incoherent systems were never glitches. They were orientation points for a different reality. And as you lean into that architecture, the world, or at least your slice of it, begins to reconfigure. You might move cities. You might change fields. You might stay exactly where you are physically and yet feel like the coordinates have shifted because you are no longer available for the same energetic contracts. People feel it. Systems feel it. The loom feels it. You are no longer just entangled with a higher timeline as a concept. You are functioning as one of its anchors. Anchoring a higher timeline doesn't mean you float above the human mess. It means you meet it differently. You still get triggered. You still feel anger, jealousy, disappointment, grief. Old sensitivities don't vanish. If anything, they come online more clearly. The difference now is what you do in the first few seconds after the impact, the moment where your system decides whether this is just another wound or a portal. Most of the world uses those moments to confirm a story. You're starting to use them to access a signal. A familiar pattern flares. Someone dismisses you, ghosts you, twists your words, crosses a boundary. Before, your awareness would spin outward. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? How do I fix this? Now, even as those thoughts flash, there's another layer, a quiet question rising from somewhere deeper than your rehearsed pain. What is the field trying to show me through this? Not in a self-blaming way. Not, how did I manifest this? As if you're a broken machine attracting punishment. More like, what configuration in me still allows this to plug in? What contract is being tested for renewal? Suddenly, the event is not just personal drama, it's data about architecture. You notice, for example, that the people who destabilize you the most are the ones whose words and energy don't match. Their language is right, conscious, spiritual, informed, but your body never fully relaxes around them. Or the opportunities that look perfect on paper but leave you feeling hollow as soon as you say yes. This mismatch is not subtle to your higher timeline. It's blaring. From that perspective, the trigger is not a verdict on your worth. It's a highlighter on a place where your outer life hasn't caught up to your inner clarity. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me again? You can ask, what would a reality look like where this pattern simply can't land? That question alone starts reweaving. Because your mind has to reach into the loom for an answer it hasn't been trained to generate. It has to imagine a version of you in a field where your boundaries are obvious. Your needs are not too much. Your intuitive reads are respected as valid information. That imagining is not fantasy. It's a request for a new template. And the field responds. Maybe not instantly, maybe not with fireworks, but with subtle edits. A new connection, a different invitation, a sudden clarity that certain dynamics are non-negotiable deal breakers, no matter how familiar they are. You start to notice that after every trigger you process honestly, a small upgrade sneaks in a new parameter, a sharper sense of what you will and will not host. This is how anchors are built. Not through grand proclamations, but through repeated, quiet fidelity to what you know is true. You begin to live by a different metric of success. Not, did everyone like me? But, did I remain coherent? Did you stay with your internal read, even when it made things awkward? Did you let yourself feel fully instead of numbing out? Did you act in a way your future self would recognize as aligned, even if your present self felt terrified? If the answer is yes, that's a successful day in the higher timeline, even if nothing looks glamorous from the outside. Because from the loom's vantage, you are not here to perform a storyline about perfection. You are here to stabilize a frequency, a human who can feel deeply, see clearly, choose precisely, and still remain in contact with the ordinary world without dissolving into it. This doesn't isolate you. Eventually, it draws others. You become a reference point. People may not articulate it, but somewhere in their system they register, around you, my own signal is easier to hear. They find themselves telling you the truth without meaning to. They feel their own misalignments more starkly in your presence, not because you're judging them, but because your field isn't participating in the usual fog. Some will move closer, some will pull away. Both are responses to the same thing: your coherence. Your job is not to chase either group. You don't need to convert anyone to your new frequency. The higher timeline isn't a campaign, it's a reality stream. Those who are entangled with it will feel the pull in their own timing, through their own initiations. Your presence can catalyze, mirror, reflect. It cannot and should not override their process. So you keep doing the unglamorous work, listening, choosing, refining. You let your life become a lab where metaphysics meets nervous system, where timeline theory meets the dishes in the sink, the message you're afraid to send, the boundary you keep postponing. Every time you bring that level of clarity into something small and human, the loom tightens its weave through you. You're no longer just a seeker trying to escape a broken world. You're a node through which a different world is quietly coming online. There's a consequence to becoming a node. The loom starts routing more through you. Not more drama, more signal. You begin to notice that your life is strangely synchronized with themes much larger than your personal storyline. The conversations around you echo collective questions. The patterns you're metabolizing in your inner world show up on headlines, in friend groups, in family dynamics. You'll process a specific wound one week, and the next week 3 different people come to you with that exact fracture exposed. This isn't random. This is morphic resonance. In a quantum entangled field, shifts in one node influence the probability landscape of others. When you metabolize a pattern, actually feel it, name it, and alter your behavior around it, you're not just healing, you're updating the template available to anyone entangled with that pattern. You become living proof, in the field, that a different response is possible. The world registers this, even if no one consciously knows what they're feeling around you. Some people experience it as relief. I don't have to pretend in your presence. Others experience it as agitation. Something about you makes it harder for me to lie to myself. Both reactions are evidence of the same thing. Your coherence is interfering with their old waveforms. This is where another layer of training begins. You learn not to personalize other people's responses to your frequency. In earlier timelines, you took everything as a verdict on your worth. If someone pulled away, you were too much or not enough. If someone clung tighter, you were responsible for their stability. Those interpretations belong to a reality where you thought you were the center of the story. From the vantage of the loom, you are not the center. You are an intersection. Energy moves through you, not because you're special, but because you're available. Available to feel what others numb, to name what others obscure, to choose differently when the pattern tries to reassert itself. When people encounter that, they're not actually reacting to you as a personality. They're reacting to the interruption of their familiar script. So you stop over-explaining your existence. You stop bending yourself into shapes that will reduce the charge others feel when their pattern hits your field. You hold your line not rigidly, but clearly. This is what my system can host. This is what it cannot. You let their projections rise and fall without contorting to rescue them from their own encounter with truth. This is not coldness, it's precision. Because simultaneously, your compassion deepens, not the kind built on over-functioning, but the kind built on recognition. You can see all the places you used to do what they're doing now, clinging to decaying systems, defending misaligned relationships, attacking anyone who threatened the narrative that kept your life stitched together. You don't need to judge it. You also don't need to participate in it. Your role is different now. You're becoming a stabilizer for a bifurcating timeline, a world where more and more people will feel the split between who they were trained to be and what their deeper configuration is demanding. Some will call it burnout. Others will call it awakening. On the level of the field, it's the same phase transition you've been moving through, now scaling out. You may feel this as a low hum of urgency. Not anxiety in the old sense, but a sense that time is dense, that every honest choice counts, that there is less and less room for delay. You watch systems strain, institutions, relationships, identities that can only function if everyone involved keeps overriding their own perception. You see the cost of that override more clearly now, the numbness, the addictions, the implosions, and you understand why your entanglement activated when it did. You are not here to lecture the world about quantum timelines. You are here to embody what it looks like when a human actually trusts their own read of reality and lives accordingly. That doesn't require a stage. It requires fidelity. In the meeting, in the kitchen, in the message thread at midnight. The observer effect isn't just a theorem. It's how you answer texts, what you agree to, what you walk away from. Your observation is no longer passive. When you look at a situation now, you're not just consuming it, you're measuring it, naming what it is, what it isn't, and what your system will host. That measurement collapses possibilities. It says to the field, this configuration is real, that one is not available here. Over time, your life becomes an ecosystem with very specific physics. And then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts in your relationship with the future. You stop relating to your higher self as a distant, aspirational image. You start to feel it as a parallel process, a consciousness in another branch of the loom, sending you data through intuitive hits, sudden knowings, unexpected peace in the middle of decisions that should terrify you. You realize that the guidance you're receiving is not external. It's your own coherence, ahead of you in the probability tree, reaching back. This is entanglement in its purest form, the version of you who already made the leap, helping you cross. You can feel when you're in sync with that version. There's a click, not flashy, solid. Choices line up, the noise drops. Even if your circumstances look chaotic, there's a through line you can feel under your feet. When you move against that through line, you feel it instantly now. The old lag, weeks or months of confusion is gone. The feedback loop is tight. You are living inside a conversation between timelines, and as you listen more closely, you begin to sense that this was never just about you surviving your own life with less pain. It was about you becoming a reference point for a different configuration of reality, one where humans like you no longer have to choose between truth and belonging, between sensitivity and strength, between coherence and connection. The higher timeline is not asking you to escape the world. It's asking you to stand inside it as proof that another way of being human is already operational. There is one more movement in this initiation, and it doesn't happen on the screen. It happens where you're sitting right now. Because for all the language, quantum, timelines, entanglement, and coherence, the entire transmission collapses into a single brutal question. In this life, are you going to live as the version of you that was trained, or the version of you that is true? Your higher timeline is not waiting in some distant future moment. It is present now as pressure, as clarity, as the unbearable discomfort of staying in places that no longer fit your nervous system. It's here as the sense that you've already seen through too much to convincingly go back to sleep. You can numb it. You can distract from it. You can't unknow it. So right here, without leaving your room, you're standing at a kind of inner event horizon. On one side is the familiar, the jokes you use to hide, the roles you slip into automatically, the systems you serve by draining yourself. On the other side is a reality you cannot fully see yet, but which you can feel with surgical precision in your body every time you take one honest breath. Your entanglement has already activated. The only thing undecided is your response. So do something simple and precise. Notice your hands. Notice the surface beneath you. Notice one place in your body that feels tight when you imagine staying exactly the same for the next 5 years. That tightness is not melodrama. It's the loom pulling on a thread. Now imagine, for a moment, the version of you that this entire transmission has been coming from, not a fantasy, but the entangled counterpart who already made the decisions you're still circling. The one who walked out of rooms that dulled their perception. The one who stopped offering explanations where there was no listening. The one who treated their sensitivity as a non-negotiable feature of their design. Ask, quietly, what is the next small, irreversible move you already made that I am still postponing? Don't force an answer. Let it surface. A conversation, a resignation, a boundary, a day off that turns into a new pattern, a message you send or finally delete, a habit you stop pretending is neutral. It won't feel grand. It will feel exact, slightly terrifying, strangely relieving. That is your portal. If you choose it, reality will not instantly become soft. Some structures will protest, some connections will strain, some parts of you will kick and bargain and cling. But underneath the noise, you will feel something you have been chasing your entire life without naming it. You will feel yourself land. Not because everything is solved, but because, for once, your choice and your knowing occupy the same coordinates. That alignment is the signature of the higher timeline, not ease, integrity. From there, the field can work with you. Synchronicities can root you. New people can recognize you. The entangled future you has clearer access to your present because you've stopped arguing with the very guidance you begged for. So, understand this. If you're still here, listening at this depth, it's not accidental content in an endless feed. It is a measurement event in your consciousness. The loom has already woven this moment into your path. The activation already happened the instant you recognized yourself in these words. What happens next tonight, tomorrow, over the coming weeks, is not about waiting for another sign. It's about whether you will finally move as if your higher timeline is not a theory, but the only version of you that has ever told the truth.